Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about um, remote management through WinSCP and an SSH client called Putty. So WinSCP is an FTP client that can utilize a few different methods. So we're going to go over how to do it, what they do, and how they work together. And that's what I had a hard time finding any sort of easily, readily accessible video that I could just show you guys exactly why this combination is so powerful. And what I want to go over real quick is Linux. All the Linux commands, like listing directories, elevating command prompt access, they're all the same. So we're going to deal with a strictly command line Linux distribution called Metasploitable. Or Metasploitable 2, I should mention. So Metasploitable 2 is a purposely vulnerable Linux system. It should never be exposed to outside networks. So what we have right now is it's running on a virtual machine on a Windows 7 host machine. So our Windows 7 host, I'm going to show you that can access this internal virtual machine. And inside that internal virtual machine, we'll be able to access it through something called NAT, or Network Address Translation. And we can actually see that. So what we'll do real quick is we'll push ourselves into Metasploitable. And if you're curious, how do I know what Metasploitable username and password is? It's actually right here in the beginning, Metasploit MSF admin. So that's all we'll do to log into that. So here we are. We are in. This is a little bit information about it. It tells us that we logged in. Here's our last login. I just used it a little while ago for something different, but I wanted to push the reason for Metasploitable. So what we need to know is we need to know where this is on our internal network or our virtual network. There's a couple of ways we can do this. The easiest, however, I feel, is to just have it tell us what the IP address is. So we can see that our IP address is 192.168.119.128. And I have a really bad memory, so I'm probably going to refer to it a few times. And this would be real world. If you need to, you can write it down. It's okay to write IP addresses down as long as you know where you're going to keep them. If you're going to keep them on your desktop on a sticky, probably not the most secure things if you're trying to hide this. Now, it's almost impossible to hide something on a network because port scanners exist. So you'll have to take action to disable port scanners on a network. Now, because it's internal to our virtual machine network, it's never intended to be completely invisible. But I'll show you where else it exists. When we go to our Network and Connection Sharing Center, we look at our adapters. You can see that I have 2 virtual network adapters listed already. Virtual. In our virtual network editor, we can see that we have a VMNet 1, which is a host only, which connects our virtual machine internally in a private network. It's basically a one-to-one connection from virtual machine to virtual machine. And it's not being used here. And I'll show you how I know this. Because we look at this 192.168.233, and we have the 192.168.119. Pull back both together. So VMNet 8 NAT is also 192.168.119.0. So it's a /24. It's using every IP available on that last octet. And we can see some information, and we can see that the subnet mask is that. So we know that we're using every available address to subnet off of. So 1 to 255. 0 is in use is our subnet. And 255 is in use. So technically, we're 1 to 254 available. You take away the first, take away the last. We're not worrying about any of these other things, but we can see that it's NAT. It's shared IP is with our host. We can take a look at our NAT, and we can see that it begins at 2, and we'll go all the way out. And we've got IPv6 disabled at the moment, which doesn't really matter. It's just I'm not going to be able to remember an IPv6 address if I can't remember our internal network address. And again, we can actually come over to Metasploitable 2, go to our settings, and look at the actual virtual machine again, and we can see that our network adapter is set to NAT. Now I have a second one set to host only, which is connecting to something else. I believe it was a one-to-one connection, peer-to-peer connection with this Kali box that I was doing some additional testing for other classes on. But in the event, anyways, what we have is we've got our VMnet 8 that's connected to this 192.168.119.128 and is also connected to our local machine here. And I'll show you what I mean. Our local machine, this Windows 7 box, is set at Ethernet adapter, local area net connection 2, and we are here. This is me. All right. And I do have internet connectivity, as does my virtual machine, because it's going out through our NAT. Think of NAT like a home network. All right. Everything that's connected to it inside the NAT can see each other. But for our purpose, we're actually on our Windows 7 box. Oh, I'll need to, I already forgot the IP address. Told you I'd forget it. So now we're going to go, remember the 192.168.119.128. From here, let's see if we can reach it, right? And we can. And we're internal, and we can see that it's a very quick ping time, less than 1 millisecond. So it's almost instantaneous. Great. That's exactly what we want. Can we come back out and talk to this box? Forgot my IP address again. Numlock came off. 6597.67.167. Oh, not in it yet. Let me come back in it. And we can. So it's a two-way conversation between, we'll stop it. It's a two-way conversation between ETH0 or Ethernet 0 on this Metasploitable box to our external box, which is our host VM. So it's outside of another network, and they're able to communicate a one-to-one, which is great. This is exactly what we want. Now, what we have now is, by default, Metasploitable has a few services running that we would have to, in a Linux distribution, enable or start or download install. It really depends on your distribution. We've gone over many times that there are several, I will call hundreds to thousands of Linux distributions. Some of them are server distributions, which will already have SSH or FTP enabled and have the firewall pass-through put in. Metasploitable 2 already has this, right? And we're not going to prove that because that would take a little longer, or we can, but we're not here to do that. We're here to specifically look at how to use WinSCP and Putty together. So if we wanted to, we can push in Putty at, and I told you I forget that address, 192.168.119.128. And we're setting everything as default. So I didn't change any settings. I have nothing set in here for SSH. This is all default. Everything in here is default. But this is where we'll find any settings that need to change for SSH. I don't care too, because SSH is all we'll be able to really do with WinSCP. It does not have a GUI, or not WinSCP, but Metasploitable 2. It does not have a GUI. It is just straight Linux terminal or command line. It does not have a GUI. It doesn't have a desktop environment. It's just there to sort of be a test environment. And that's exactly what we're going to do, is we're going to testing SSH through into this. So we'll open it up and we'll get a login window. Now, you may get a pop-up that says, do you want to trust this site certificate? I already tested this. So, and I've opted into this so many times that I have not seen this before. So if we go back to it, exact same information here is here. Ooh, gotta release my pointer. It's right here. Nothing different. It's the exact same everything. Now, because I've had more packets push, this is more updated. They were going to see more than 382, and we've got 416. But other than that, it's identical to the T. Packets are changing and moving, but that's okay. We're aware of that. So we just SSH. We're remoted into this virtual machine through NAT. If you have one on the internet or if you have one on your network, the process is no different. That's how you SSH to it. Now, if you have a key, depending on its encryption level, there's a few extra changes to do. But for basic standard default, there you go. You're SSH'd in. We'll close that session and we'll push in another thing. WinSCP is an FTP client. Now, we just logged in SSH through port 22. There is also FTP. 192.168.119. I forgot. All right. So if we leave this as our file protocol, FTP, SCP, SFTP, or WebDAV, we have our options here, and they'll change ports as we use each. All right. But we're going to leave it at flat FTP. Now, if we push anonymous login, it automatically types in the username anonymous and the password at anonymous. We're not going to log in as anonymous. So we'll remove that. We know that the username is msfadmin and the password again, msfadmin, because when Linux creates users, when you create a user, you're also giving it local user rights. And depending on the FTP client or the FTP server on the Linux box, you can enable local users. All right. So in this same set here, there's a great video from Eli, the computer guy, about how to do so. We're not going over that. We're just showing the combination here. And I feel like a lot of people miss this combination. All right, but I'll show you. We're going to log in and we're already on that FTP. And here's the cool thing is we have FTP over the entire computer. That's Linux. That's the entire Linux directories, everything from CD-ROMs to the mounted drives, anything in our root directory. We've got it all. And we can do anything we want to an extent. It really depends on your rights. So we've got an Apache directory here. We've got our apt directory. And if you look, we've got read writes privileges for most of this. Here's Pro FTP. That's what it's using for Pro FTP. And here's its configuration files for Pro FTPD. So we wanted to open it. We'll select the program. We're going to tell it it's Notepad. Here's our local passwords, and it looks like I've got word wrap turned on, so let me turn that off. There. There's our, it's really poorly displayed, and that's because it's a Windows looking at it. It's kind of ugly, but typically what you'd see is you'd see something that they come out in lines on. It's every line with a pound sign in front of it. I'm not going to sit here and re-edit all of this. We're not going to save it back because we do have read-write privileges. So we could write our changes to it from here. And I don't want to do that because it may break what we're doing here because I was just kind of looking around. So here is WinSCP as a default. You want to drag and drop files to and from our directories. Let's go back up. We'll come back to msfadmin, and this is our root directory for that. We could push in files. Let's push in a few files here. Push it in. So I just uploaded those files, and we can download it right back too. All right. If we were managing this as a website, if we had pictures, I don't have any pictures on this YouTube, but we could just drag those pictures in from one. I don't really have much here. We could grab this information here and put it in, okay, Just dragging and dropping, piece of cake. You can also do this from the desktop and drag it in as well. Now, because it's a shortcut, that's what it looks like in Linux, and very, very small size, 2K. So it was almost instantaneous. But if the file is large, you'll see it come down here in a transfer queue. And you can stop, pause, start, re-edit that, put something in there that's a higher priority. There's a lot you can do inside it. And it's pretty self-explanatory. All right. One of the things that we do want to look at right now is we're logged in as MSF admin, which actually is the highest level of privilege that this one can get. So if we wanted to it's going to prompt us for a password. So we can't do anything we want because we're still at local user. But if we wanted to, MSF admin, we can make ourselves root. All right, so now release, come on, there we go. So now we've got that little pound sign and we can do anything we want. The same thing went here though, because MSF admin is the root. That's why we're able to navigate entirely through everything instead of being stuck to our home and the users that are there. Okay, so we have plenty of expandability. We can push all the way through everything. It's dangerous because, like we said, we can make changes to anything we want. We have read, write, execute privileges pretty much for the entire drive, for the entire root drive. So here's the cool part of this. Now, they only works if you have both Putty and in WinSCP installed. So we've got this console terminal. We can push terminal, and we can push in a few commands. I've never been really good at using these, but you can see right here, we're pushing in commands. And we're pushing in things like that. I've never used this because this button to the right of it opens in Putty. And here's what's really cool. We have a session open right now. If we load in any security keys that needed to be used through SSH, it would automatically log us in at the last user privilege we left it at. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to click this button, open session in Putty, or Control P. This is the only time Control P doesn't print. And what happened? The same thing happened with all the Putty commands that we ever had right here. We're in Putty. So all we have to do is log in. We already recognize that our password or username is MSF admin. And we're in. We are logged in. And if you don't believe me, we can just check it. 192.168.112 or 192.111. 192.168.119.128 and 192.168.119.128. Again, 192.168.119.128. It works with just a push of a button. The other alternative for me, using any other FTP client that I know of, there's probably some out there, is to take what we have after loading WinSCP, then coming back over here, 192.168.119.128, putting us to SSH, opening, and then logging in. So we save about, I will call it 6 steps. We have to activate our start button, hop into Putty, and it could be a shortcut that you could click on the desktop, but you're still pushing outside of where we were in WinSCP to get to that. All right. Then we can push in Putty. So that's 2. Then we have to type in an address, 192.168.119.128. That's step 3. Then we have to load it, run it, click it, pull it in. That's step 4. Then log in, 5. 6, and we're in, or 5 and we're in. Your choice there, but we're taking a lot of extra time to do that when something already does it for us. All we've got to do is push us to Putty and type in a password. If you have an SSH key, say to like an Amazon instance or something else, that SSH key actually can be loaded when we start our new session. All right. So you load in the key, password and key and username, they're all the same. From then when you push over and you hit your session, automatically logs you in. So this has been a video explaining the connection that WinSCP and Putty have with one another, why it's important, and the catch here, the only one catch here, is if you want to use WinSCP and Putty connected together, you have to have both WinSCP and Putty downloaded. And I've left it in the description, the video description, for the address for WinSCP and Putty. But of course, you can always Google it. If you didn't want to Google it, you want to click the link, there they are at the bottom.